Earth is a speck compared to the vast universe. Does that make us insignificant?
Many secular thinkers make this claim. It's true that we're small compared to the large universe, but our value comes from our Creator being made in His image.
Why do physicists say we live in a Goldilocks universe?
Because the universe is fine-tuned to allow life to exist. There are many parameters that have been discovered in physics, like the strength of gravity, the speed of light, the electromagnetic constant, that if these numbers were very different from the values they have, life would not be possible. And this means a creator must be responsible for us being here.
So I've got a curveball for you.
Okay.
Why would God see us as significant? What's our point in this part of creation if He's created this vast universe? Many astronomers say that Earth's size and position in the universe proves that we're nothing special. Keaton is a speaker and writer for Creation Ministries who studied the intersection of faith and philosophy and science for years. Would you say that our modern understanding of the universe proves that we're not really special at all?
Well, no, at least it certainly doesn't follow that we are insignificant. But that is the claim, as you say, that many astrophysicists and astronomers are making today. But I want to argue that that is reading their own philosophy and religious perspective into the scientific evidence. It doesn't follow from the science itself.
I see. Who all is making this claim and what is the reasoning behind it?
Well, a great example would be the late astronomer Carl Sagan. He's well known, people might have seen his Cosmos series that explores the different parts of the universe. Very well done. But Sagan was a naturalist. He believed that nature is all there is, that there is no God, no creator, and that worldview came out in his Cosmos series. He said famously that the universe is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. And, he was influential in this the space program when the Voyager 1 spacecraft was launched, and it was sent out to the far reaches of the solar system. And back in 1990, when it was near the edge, Sagan persuaded the people there to turn the camera around and point it back in the direction of Earth. And it took a famous photograph that we have now that's sometimes called the pale blue dot photograph. And so it showed, just an empty, vast sea of blackness and a little speck in the middle of the photo sitting in a beam of sunlight. And that was our planet. And Sagan himself wrote an entire book on this subject called Pale Blue Dot. And his purpose in writing the book was to say that this shows that we're insignificant, that human beings, might have in previous centuries thought that we were special with the universe designed with us in mind and maybe even for us, for human beings as the pinnacle of creation. But he said this is a delusion. Our vain conceits, and we imagined that we were in some privileged position in the universe. But in Sagan's mind, this photograph alone, he asked readers to sit there and contemplate it, to stare at it, and recognize that everyone you've ever known is represented by that little point of pale light, the whole history of the human race, people warring against each other. It turns out all this, Sagan says, is insignificant. We're not special. Nobody made us.
So what was his point in saying all that? Is he just trying to say that we're insignificant, life is pointless, go to sleep, it doesn't really matter if you wake up in the morning, that sort of thing? Or what is he actually getting at?
Yeah, I don't think he's preaching hopelessness. Rather, maybe a couple things I could say here. First, he, as I say, is not reading that out of the photograph itself.
Right.
He's imposing his own view, his view that God doesn't exist. He is an atheist. And so he's saying that we got here by accident. Nobody created us with intention, with purpose and meaning. But secondly, I think he would probably view it himself as more a message of encouragement and hope and perhaps humility.
How's that?
He would say, that the Christian way of looking at the world, that human beings are special and maybe like the highest, organisms in all of creation, that's a misreading of the evidence. And for him to say this, tiny Earth in a vast, vast universe shows that we're not as special as we think we are. But I think that's a mistake as well, because, from Sagan's point of view, he's not just saying, have a realistic perspective of human beings, not to elevate ourselves higher than we ought.
Right.
He's rather saying we have no value whatsoever, since there is no creator, that our lives are objectively meaningless, no ultimate purpose in life.
Now, would you say that that's Sagan's perspective in particular, or is it generally a common point of view among scientists or atheists?
Yeah, there certainly are many others who have argued in the same way. For example, Bill Nye is another instance of this. He's the science guy that he played a scientist on TV, a kids show, and he famously debated Ken Ham a number of years ago on this well-known creationist. Well, Bill Nye is a humanist, and he actually won a humanist award at one point. And in the acceptance speech years ago, part of his speech, he said, "I am insignificant." And what was his proof of this? Well, he went on to say, it's because the Earth is a tiny speck orbiting another tiny speck, the sun, which he said is an unremarkable star. And that star itself is orbiting, around this collection of specks, right? The Milky Way galaxy, which is one of billions of galaxies. We're a speck orbiting a speck in the middle of other specks in the midst of specklessness, is what Nye says. And so his conclusion that we are not significant, again, I think he's imagining himself to be taking a humble position. But why does Bill Nye not treat all human beings like they have no value?
Right.
That's what he's ultimately saying,
It's all well and good to say, "Oh, I'm significant," till I go, "Oh, you're insignificant too."
Yeah.
He's not significant.
Yeah.
She's not significant. Doesn't really matter who's significant or not.
Exactly. And thankfully, I'm sure that Bill Nye himself is inconsistent with his starting point there. And I'm sure he treats his neighbors with respect and champions human rights and loves his children and things like that. That's all well and good. But it's really not an atheistic perspective that we can draw that conclusion from. These guys are right in terms of saying that if there is no God, then we are insignificant. But it's that starting point that leads to the conclusion, not the scientific evidence itself.
So elaborate on where things go wrong with this point of view. What are the consequences of seeing all of human life and existence and even our place in the universe as entirely insignificant?
Well, I think we can break it down into a couple of different claims that they're making here. There are factual matters, and then there's what are the metaphysical implications. Even with the factual claims they're making, there's two distinct ones. So first, you've got the claim that we are tiny compared to the big universe, and that's obviously true.
This is true.
So the other one that we can look at next would be that Bill Nye said that our sun is an unremarkable star, and this is part of a wider claim they make about, allegedly Copernicus showed that we're no longer the center of the universe as people prior to that had imagined, the Earth at the center, and therefore more recent discoveries have continually demoted us away from the center to a non-special place. And today we look at it as though we must be in just, the Earth isn't special, the sun isn't special, the galaxy isn't special. It's just a sort of backwater corner of the universe, mediocre, the same as everywhere else. But let's talk first about the size.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we assign significance based on how big or small something is. We think a mountain is impressive. It's huge. We think an ant, doesn't matter so much. It's tiny. But is that really how we should view our place in the universe?
No. We wouldn't say, for example, that, tall people are more valuable than short people. And even secular philosophers realize this, right? You think about in popular films like Star Wars, you've got Yoda saying size matters not. Or Dr. Seuss, he's got this character Horton, the elephant, who recognizes that a person's a person no matter how small. And so I would say it's actually a category error to conclude from the fact that the Earth is tiny compared to the rest of the universe that means we are insignificant. Historically, this is not the way people understood that because it's not really a new discovery that the Earth is tiny compared to the distance to stars. Aristotle already was aware of that fact. He talked about the Earth being small compared to the vastness of the heavens. I can quote, even Roman emperors that made that point. And Claudius Ptolemy, writing in the 2nd century AD, he wrote this book called the Almagest, which is the textbook used on astronomy throughout the Middle Ages. He likewise said the Earth is like the size of a point compared to how far away the stars are. And yet these people did not conclude that therefore we are, scum or insignificant specks or anything like that.
It's amazing that the ancients, even at that time, were able to do the math and figure out, if I'm here and if I look at a star from here and I look at a star over there, it doesn't really move. So it must be really far away.
Yeah. The parallax trigonometry. They were able to work that out, at least to some, degree of accuracy. And yet they knew the Earth was really large as well. The Greeks, Eratosthenes, several hundred years before the time of Jesus, they'd already, to a pretty high degree of accuracy, they'd worked out the circumference of the Earth.
That's pretty neat.
So they knew, not as well as we understand it today. Sure, modern telescopes, once we recognized that what used to be called nebulae, these like pale, fuzzy blobs of stars, we eventually discovered those are entire galaxies. So the Milky Way is just one of many billions of galaxies. And so we have a better understanding of how vast the universe is today, but the ancients knew that it was really large, and yet they didn't conclude that we don't matter.
Now, hold on, nebulae. I know we have nebulae today. What's the distinction between how the ancients thought of nebula and how we think of them now?
Sure. There's still a modern, a star, as we define it today, is a condensed ball of burning hydrogen gas, whereas a nebulae, what we call a nebulae now, is a spread out, a cloud of gas, essentially, out in space. The beautiful, pictures to look at if people want to search for those, NASA imagery and so forth. But prior to like Edwin Hubble, they used to also call these, like, with the best telescopes that we had, you could just see fuzzy blobs out in space, and we didn't realize at the time that that was actually a separate galaxy outside of our Milky Way. They called those nebulae as well. So two different types of nebulae.
Thanks for clarifying. It's interesting just how much more there is always to learn about the universe God's put us in.
Yeah.
Now, all this reminds me of Psalm 8, where the psalmist says, what is man that you are mindful of him? You consider the heavens, you consider, our lives are like blades of grass. We don't last all that long, and we're not all that big in relation to the universe. Now, the biblical writers often contemplated their place in the universe and how it related to God. They felt small in comparison.
That's true. I think Psalm 8 is a great example of this, that he says, when I consider the work of your fingers, God, the sun, moon, and stars that you put in place, what is man that you're mindful of him? So I think it's legitimate that it, considering the vastness and the power that's out there in the universe compared to a finite and frail human being should lead us to reflect on our own significance, right? And contemplate, are we all that special? But the psalmist doesn't conclude that therefore we're not significant. What's his conclusion? He says that God crowned humanity with glory and honor and put him in charge of the rest of creation. He talks about how we have dominion, which he's drawing from Genesis chapter 1, the dominion mandate, it's often called. So we're supposed to take care of the rest of the universe. And so, that means we have like meaning and purpose in life that God intended for us. The Bible gives us a proper perspective to have what we talked about earlier, the right understanding of human beings, where, yes, we should be humbled, not elevating ourselves higher than we ought, to think that we're, gods, like Oprah Winfrey says, but not devaluing ourselves either and thinking that we have no significance at all, because our significance comes from the fact that we were made by a God who cares about us.
Even the writer of Ecclesiastes, who's always talking about how all is vanity and all these different things, his point is that apart from our service before God and apart from following him and apart from the value he gives us, there isn't really a point to life. We are insignificant without that.
Right. If it's just life under the sun alone, kind of, he seems to be contemplating, life and its meaning without factoring in God's intentions and purposes and so forth, then it is meaningless and all vanity. And talking about like our lifespans too, that should knowing that we only have so many years on this earth. We're like grass that withers away and flowers that fade. That should also lead us to a place of humility and contemplating that, we're not as great as we might often imagine. But another one who talked about this is Blaise Pascal. He wrote this collection of thoughts called his Pensées. They were posthumously published. He died relatively young. But this work, he talks about human beings and their value. And he says, man is but a reed. We're finite and frail compared to the universe. But he says, unlike the universe itself, we are thinking beings, a thinking reed,
Right.
he said.
We're the only part of the universe that can comprehend its place in the universe.
Yes. Yep. And so I think Pascal had it right. The balance between haughtiness, pride, arrogance, and belittling ourselves. And I think the atheists here are making the mistake to say that we have no significance at all.
I hope you're enjoying this content so far. Creating content like this takes a considerable amount of time, effort, and resources. We're passionate about getting this message out, and we want to keep bringing you more videos like this one. But here's the thing. We need your help to make that happen. Your support, no matter how big or small, will help us cover our production costs and enable us to continue creating impactful content. To support this project, just use the link in the description below or the on-screen prompt. We're so thankful for your support.
So if you're saying that our value comes from God, how exactly, what is the value that God gives us? How does this value exist, and what ought we to do with that?
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to the Genesis creation account as well, where the Bible tells us that we were made in God's image, right? And later scriptures refer back to the image of God as the thing that gives us the value that we have. So biblically speaking, we can say the value of human beings is derived from our Creator, who is the ultimate, valuable being. He's infinitely valuable. So yeah, atheists don't have that to appeal to, and Christians can make sense of why we have human rights and so forth. It all is derived from our Maker.
So what does it mean to be made in the image of God? What is an image?
Theologians debate about that. I think they often treat it as though these are like alternatives that you have to choose between, but I think both sides of the coin probably are accurate. And I'm speaking here of, on the one hand, it seems to include the idea, the image of God, that we resemble God in certain ways. Now, we're obviously not identical to him. There's certain attributes he has that we do not. He's all-powerful, all-knowing, and so on. But we have certain capacities that make us stand out compared to the rest of the creation that he made. We are intelligent beings, and we have a moral sense, right? Whereas the animals don't commit evil acts and so forth. They have instincts to guide them and so forth. But humans wrestle with questions about the meaning of life, and so forth. So we're creative and all these sorts of ways that we resemble God in certain limited respects. The other aspect would be that we represent God in many ways. The image of God idea seems to include this notion that we are to be his ambassadors on earth, ruling over creation, just like God is the king of the entire universe. And so that, again, goes back to the dominion mandate as well, that we're to steward the things that he gave us here and develop them, to invent technology, to understand the world. All of that is entailed by this charge that God gave to Adam and Eve to subdue and rule the earth.
So in a sense, being created with some of the same desires and mandates and whatnot of God gives us a responsibility and an ability to create using the things he's given us, to take care of the world that he's created, to take care of each other. Because, like you mentioned earlier, if I say I'm insignificant, well, then you're insignificant too.
Yeah.
Anyone else in here is insignificant. So why do I have to treat you the way I would want to be treated? But if the Lord gives us the same value before him, then I have to treat you with the significance he would give you.
Yeah. And it's sort of comparing these two worldviews, right? It's
Right.
If atheism is true, if there is no God, if we weren't designed, we're accidental byproducts of an evolutionary process, which is blind forces of nature that did not have us in mind, then our lives are ultimately without value, meaning, and purpose. But if biblical creation is true, then we were designed with purpose, meaning, and value.
So I've got a curveball for you.
Okay.
Why would God see us as significant? What's our point in this part of creation if he's created this vast universe?
A couple of things there. I mean, I guess you're sort of asking about the meaning and purpose of life, and biblically speaking, I think it's to glorify God and to have fellowship with him. We're made for a relationship, and we are to know God and enjoy him for all eternity. In terms of why then did he make such a huge universe?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Carl Sagan, again, had this famous idea that, if the Earth is the only place in the universe with life, then it seems like an awful waste of space because the universe is so enormous. But if God is the creator, then it's not a waste for him, right? It doesn't take any extra effort on his part to make a bigger universe than a smaller one. And I would argue that it gives God greater glory to see, we are awed by the vastness of space, and there's always more to learn. We haven't completely exhausted our explorations of it.
I doubt we ever will.
Right. And so, the heavens declare the glory of God, the scripture says. And so a big universe helps us to see just how big our creator is.
Yep. The more we explore it, the more we see just how vast and amazing the heavens are. And like you said, just how much more they declare his glory, the more we find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as we talked about earlier too, it can bring us to a place of humility, realizing that we are small compared to this vast universe.
Yep. All right, you talked about the size of the universe, but you also mentioned something about location.
Yeah.
Why does it matter where we are in the universe? Are we in some, cosmic gas station rest stop outside of the big city, or are we in some, does it matter where we are if the universe is random,
Yeah, well, in a sense here too, we want to distinguish between what are the facts of the matter? Are we in a place that is just mediocre and not special? But then what are the metaphysical implications of that? Even if we were, does that make us insignificant? And I would argue no to the latter, right? Because as you're saying, if you live in a glorious mansion versus a cookie cutter house that's the same of everyone else on your block, your own personal value doesn't change based on that. But we can talk here historically. Atheists often get this idea. They have a whole principle that they've worked out called the Copernican principle. It's sometimes called the principle of mediocrity, and to say that we know the place we live in our place in space is mediocre.
That seems something that would not be a good idea to imply at work.
I agree. But this comes from a certain reading of history. So typically the story, told by men like Stephen Hawking and others, it goes like this. We used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe. And when Copernicus came along, he demoted Earth to no longer being the center, the place of importance, where God had specially created us. Now we're just one of many planets orbiting the sun. And then we continued to learn other things about there's more galaxies, and therefore, as Bill Nye says, it's just an unremarkable star, and we're in a humdrum corner of the universe. I would argue that's actually a misreading historically. This is at least not the way the people at the time viewed things.
Really?
Yeah. For example, when they did think that Earth was the center of the universe, pre-Copernicus and Galileo, they viewed the heavens as the celestial realm that's glorious and unchanging and perfect, and that bodies travel in perfect circles and so on. Whereas the Earth they regarded as the place with corruption and where things fall. They thought of it as the bottom of the universe in a sense.
I see. The Earth is the armpit of the universe.
Yeah, you could put it like that. Or even worse, actually, if you look at the medieval cosmologies where they wedded a Ptolemaic understanding, a geocentric universe with Christianity, people like Dante in his Divine Comedy, to him, the surface of the Earth was an intermediate place between heaven And the real center of the universe was in the middle of Earth.
Ooh.
As you descend down the levels of hell to come to right in the heart was Satan's throne.
Oh, fun. So Satan was at the center of the universe in that frame of
That's
reference.
right. You can see how it's not in their minds the best place to be, in fact. And so Galileo and Copernicus themselves talked about how they viewed their own theories of heliocentrism, saying that the sun is at the center and the earth travels around. They thought that was a promotion for Earth, not a demotion.
Gave them the ability to just observe the universe and kind of see all the glory of the heavens.
Yeah, that was a big part
of
of their argument too, where they're saying, look, we're not stationary in one spot, but as we orbit, that gives us a wider viewpoint so we can understand the heavens even better.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this Copernican principle, or the principle of mediocrity, I would argue is kind of a revisionist historical understanding. It's not true that Copernicus demoted us in terms of our significance, but it is true that the Earth is not at the center of the universe like we thought before that time. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the atheists here are right about the facts of the matter, that demonstrates that we're not special in any way.
Right.
Because there are many other ways that you could be special besides being at the center.
So the atheists are generally saying, if our location isn't special, we're not special. Is
Right,
that true?
Well, that's the implication that they're deriving. But before we even get to that part, where I want to take apart their additional metaphysical value assumption, let's even talk about the facts of the matter in this case. The scientific facts do not suggest that we are completely unspecial and in a mediocre location.
Really? Why is that?
There's a couple of categories of evidence. The more scientists and astronomers have uncovered about the universe, the more we realize that Earth is incredibly rare. In terms of all these conditions have to be just so in order for life to exist. But in several different ways, our universe and our local location in the universe are fine-tuned to allow life to exist.
I see.
So we can talk about two categories. There's cosmic fine-tuning and there's local fine-tuning.
What's the difference between those two categories?
Well, the cosmic fine-tuning has to do with how our universe is set up to allow life to exist. Now, we only have one universe. We can't compare our universe with other universes that we've observed, right? But we can imagine that our universe might have been different than it actually is. And what scientists have discovered over the past few decades is that there are certain parameters that are built into our universe, like constants that are embedded in the laws of nature. Things like the force of gravity, the strength of gravity, the electromagnetic force, the speed of light, and various things. And many of these parameters, if they were slightly different than they are, chemistry would not even be possible. Life could not exist in our universe if these parameters were a hair's breadth different from what they are in many cases. And so they call this the fine-tuning of the universe, that it seems like it's set up to allow life to exist. Had our universe been different, life could not exist. And this has led many to a position that says that the best explanation for this is that there is a creator who designed our universe with life in mind. A man like Sir Fred Hoyle, for example, investigated a lot of these fine-tuning parameters, and he converted out of atheism to not Christianity, but a belief in God. He said that it appears that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry.
That is one way to put it.
And it wasn't just a superficial appearance. He said this is the conclusion that the evidence drives us toward. It must be true. Now, there are some who say this can be explained by supposing that maybe there are other universes and an infinite variety with all these, varying parameters, and therefore we've just won the cosmic lottery. It's just by chance that we have a life-friendly, life-permitting universe.
Is the basic idea that, okay, if you have one universe and it did turn out just right, well, then you would have had to, from the get-go, win the cosmic lottery. But if you have an infinite number of universes, well, there's an infinite number of universes without life. We just happen to be one of the few that ended up with life.
Yeah.
It's trying to reduce the incomprehensibility of the matter.
And to still explain it by chance without resorting to God as the designer of the universe. This is the two alternatives. Either you have to say God designed the universe and did set up the universe to be fine-tuned to allow life to exist. You can't just say, if there was only one shot at it, we were the lucky winners. Right. So to make the chance theory plausible, you have to say there's not only an infinite number of these universes, but with varying parameters.
I love the multiverse theory just because then you have to wonder, so what created the laws that allowed multiple universes to exist and coexist and develop?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what's been discovered further is that it's not enough to just posit any old multiverse. You have to have causal relations between them to get these varying parameters. Really? They sometimes talk about a universe generating mechanism. And the trouble then is that mechanism itself, it turns out, would have to be just as fine-tuned. And so this ultimately doesn't avoid the problem. It's fine-tuning even if you have a multiverse. And so really there's no other explanation, no alternative that's plausible besides God is the creator.
I don't know. It sounds like if I'm going to try to find an alternate universe version of myself, I'm going to have to be looking for a very long time through a lot of different universes to even find one where any life exists.
Yeah, but if there's an infinite number of them, then you must exist somewhere is the idea. But obviously this is not scientific. It's a desperate attempt to avoid the implications that science points us to a creator. So that's the cosmic fine-tuning. Then there's this whole other category. Even once you have our universe in existence, it doesn't mean there's just life everywhere. The universe is life-friendly, but most of the places in the universe are quite hostile to life, right? There's all kinds of conditions that have to be just right in our more local environment, like our galaxy, our solar system, and so on.
Are you implying that our humdrum little back corner of the sun is actually fine-tuned for our existence?
It's also fine-tuned. Our sun, for example, Bill Nye is mistaken to say it's an unremarkable star. When you compare it to all the other stars, the vast majority of stars out there are much more volatile. They emit things like super flares and coronal mass ejections and so forth, whereas our sun is quite stable, less dangerous and hostile to life than the vast majority of stars.
Wow.
And in many other ways, it's very hospitable to life. It provides a solar wind, for example, that pushes away a lot of the cosmic radiation that would otherwise bombard Earth and be detrimental to life. And there's, we could go through a million examples, but go ahead, Josh. Do you want to add something?
Yeah. What are some of the other examples of local fine tuning in our solar system?
Yeah, that's what I was about to go into. So, the Earth, for example, orbits the sun in what's called the circumstellar habitable zone. It's kind of a mouthful, but that it's also known as the Goldilocks zone because this is the idea that for a planet to be able to house life, it's got to be not too hot, not too cold. If the Earth was much closer to the sun than it is, like Venus, it would be, in a blaze of fire, so to speak. It'd be too hot, right? If it was much further away, like Mars, the liquid water on Earth would be frozen, and you need liquid water to support life. Astronomers have recognized as well. And so it's not too hot, not too cold. It's orbiting in the Goldilocks zone, the place that's just right to allow life. We have a moon that helps to stabilize our tilt and so forth, causes the tides. The fact that our Earth spins around in 24 hours, that helps to equal out the temperatures on the Earth. If one side was facing the sun all the time, that side would be extremely hot and the other side would be very cold. Just tons and tons of fine-tuned parameters that have to be just so in order for life to exist.
On your point there, I've read a number of papers recently where people keep discovering planets in a habitable zone.
Yeah.
But a lot of those planets are so close to their star that they would be tidally locked. They'd always be facing that star, in which case you're going to have a hot side and a cold side, and it's going to be very difficult for any form of life, at least anything like what we would expect to see here, to even exist.
Yeah, that's right. And it happens anytime you're too close. The moon is actually tidally locked to the Earth, which is why we always see the same face of the moon, even while it's orbiting around. And so, the more we learn about the nature of our local cosmic environment, it indicates that it is special. Earth is extremely rare. NASA is all the time trying to find other Earth-like planets out there. And they're just, finding that other solar systems are dramatically different than ours in many ways. And it's extremely unlikely to get all the conditions in one place to allow life to exist.
There's no place like home.
Yeah, Dorothy had it right?
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to think about how our cosmic home is designed just for us. As unremarkable as it might look compared to a lot of the other stars in the universe, the Lord really has set it up for us to be able to flourish and to serve Him and to enjoy the other people He's given us that are made in His image that we can enjoy life with.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, here too, just like with the cosmic fine-tuning, there are, of course, the universe is so large that many secular astronomers assume that maybe eventually, maybe not in our Milky Way galaxy, but because there's billions of galaxies, that there've got to be these other Earth-like planets out there. But there's also an additional factor that indicates it's not just that all these conditions have to be just right for life, but there's a great book called The Privileged Planet. A scientist and philosopher, both Christians, got together and they realized that it turns out on our planet, it's not only that the conditions are just so to allow life, but also to allow scientific discovery. Having a transparent atmosphere, having a large moon enables us to learn about the universe in ways that would not be possible had we lived in some other Earth-like planet and so forth. And so the conjunction of those two things, the conditions allow for life and allow for scientific discovery, those together indicate that this must have been done on purpose. It's not likely to be a coincidence, even given the enormous size of our universe.
I love that last point, because even if you had a planet that evolved just perfectly, was in just the right spot to create life, the planet that we have lets us also see everything else in the universe.
Yeah.
And, well, not everything else, but you know what I mean. It lets us see so far into the universe and get to examine it and see how amazing and huge and wonderful it is. I mean, we wouldn't even know that we were specks of dust, as it were, floating around in the cosmos if God hadn't given us a planet that was fine-tuned to let us see out into.
Yep. It's the atmosphere is set up that way, and the fact that we're like where we are, or the sun orbiting within the Milky Way, had we been near the center or in a totally different thing like a globular cluster and so forth, it would not be possible to learn of other galaxies, it turns out. And so, all these things look like a conspiracy that our universe was designed with us in mind. And that's a conclusion of the scientific evidence, not Christians reading things into the evidence, but the evidence pointing to a creator.
Gotcha. Well, Keaton, what would you like viewers to take away from this discussion?
I hope they'll understand when they hear many secular-minded astronomers make claims that science has shown we're actually just insignificant, we're not valuable, that no creator is necessary to explain our universe, that's a mistaken point of view. The evidence argues strongly against that. No, everything we learn from astronomy and physics indicates that the biblical view is correct, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and that God does care deeply about us. He designed us in His image with meaning, with significance, with a job to do. And He loved us enough that He sent His only Son to take on human flesh, to die in our place, because we've messed up our relationship with that Creator by disobeying His commands. And so, Sagan, in his book Pale Blue Dot, he said, in this photograph, there's no hint that help will come from outside to save us from ourselves. But how do you derive that from looking at a photograph of Earth? No, it's not true that our tininess, the fact that we're a speck within a vast universe, shows that we don't have a savior. The Bible tells us who the Savior is.
The creator of the universe sent His only beloved Son to this tiny little speck in the universe.
That's right.
Because He values and cares for us so much.
Yeah, that makes our speck pretty important.
Now, Keaton, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. I'm sure our audience would love to learn more. Here I've got a video, Genesis, the Key to the Gospel. What can you tell me about it?
Sure. Well, this is a presentation on the importance of Genesis. It's kind of the bread and butter of our ministry, and we show that you can take Genesis at face value. It gives us the true history of the world, and the scientific evidence helps to back that up. So it's a great way for believers to get equipped with answers for our faith and show that the history in Genesis is reliable.
Well, if you want to watch Genesis, the Key to the Gospel for free, check out the link for a free stream in the description below. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Keaton. I've really appreciated this conversation.
It's been enjoyable.
You have a wonderful day.
You too.